Evan, just begin, if you would, by telling us, for those of us who don't still know what universal credit actually is, what it is, just very briefly.
Universal credit simplifies the benefit system. It pulls together, instead of having three different agencies administer a whole range of benefits, each of which have their own rules. Universal credit tries to bring them all into one system, where each family receives a single payment, and there's a single set of rules for when you move from out of work into work, for example.
As one of the architects of universal credit, would you accept that it's been a disaster?
I think there have been some serious challenges with universal credit, particularly. I think it was always intended as a reform that helped people move into work and ease that transition into work. I think some of the biggest challenges with it have been around making sure the social security element of the benefit system has enough emphasis. I think we've got to remember as well that universal credit is being introduced in the context of a whole range of other cuts and savings being made to the benefit system, both the LBC system and universal credit. And I think it's that context that's doing some of the biggest damage to both universal credit as an idea, but also to the pockets of the people that depend upon the benefit system.
Is it essentially a plank in a deeply right-wing ideology, or is that unfair to the Tories?
I think that's very unfair. I mean, I was involved in universal credit back in 2008-9. The idea was to fix some of the very serious and very established problems in the legacy benefit system. You do have a whole range of different benefits, each of which are quite confusing in and of themselves. When you put them all together, it's an incredibly complicated mess. People found it difficult to understand where they sat within the current benefit system. They were scared to move into work because they couldn't see that they would necessarily be better off, and often, sadly, they weren't. These problems needed to be fixed. Universal credit was a genuine attempt to fix that.
Is the real problem with UC simply the implementation, the rollout, the delays that people have experienced in moving on to it?
I think there are two types of problems with universal credit. The first one is the administration of universal credit, and that needs to get better. There have been some changes recently that I think are quite positive. Equally, I think it's the fact that universal credit is a reform that's been tried to be done on the cheap. As I said earlier, there's a huge amount of money that's been taken out of the benefit system, which makes it quite hard for people to manage that change. I think the left and the government need to take away from this is that you can't do welfare reform on the cheap. You need to put money into it. You need to invest in it properly. It is a reform that's there for the long term. It's there to change how the benefit system works, and to try and do it while taking money out of the system is both unfair on the people that depend upon the benefit system, but also both politically and from a policy perspective, quite silly.
Where is that money being taken out of?
We've had the benefit freeze, so that affects people on legacy benefits and the current benefit system. That means that benefit levels haven't changed while the cost of living has been increasing. That's been one of the biggest changes. There have been lots of changes to housing benefit that limit the amount of housing support people can get. Arguably, the driver of high housing costs is the housing market, and what's happening is that the government, in making these changes, is penalising the lowest income households for not sorting out a problem that rests elsewhere. And we need to look at the benefit system as part of a wider set of issues. And if we don't deal with the cost of living, the cost of benefits is still going to go up, whether you stick with the legacy system or with universal credit. And that's some of these bigger problems need to be thought about as well.
As we know, MPs were due to vote on whether to move 3 million benefit claimants onto universal credit in the next few weeks, but it's now been pushed back by the government, and Parliament will instead be asked to vote on transferring just 10,000 people to this new system. Do you think that's a good move by Amber Rudd?
I think it's sensible to make sure that those people that have been on benefits for the longest time get the support they need to manage that transition onto a new benefit system. For your listeners, it's important to remember that an extra 2 million people will still move on to universal credit this year because either their circumstances change or they move into or out of work. They'll be moving on to universal credit instead of the old system. So there is still a large number of people for the DWP to move on to universal credit this year, and it is still going to affect a large number of your listeners and people across the country.
Can you see work? Can it still work as a policy, and will it still work?
Yeah, fundamentally, I think everyone has agreement behind the principles of universal credit. The biggest concerns with it are the implementation. I think those concerns over the implementation are being taken seriously, albeit belatedly. As someone who is involved in the system from the outset, it's very positive to see some of the recent changes made to universal credit, but incredibly frustrating to not have those measures in place at the outset 5 years ago, back in 2013, when universal credit was first announced. And I think it's a symptom of a government that's tried to do welfare reform on the cheap, and they need to invest in it properly to get it right.
And just to conclude, Amber Rudd, of course, was the Home Secretary, lost her job because of the Windrush crisis. Is she the right woman to be presiding over universal credit and its rollout?
I've been impressed. I mean, Windrush was a debacle, and Policy and Practice has written about some of the challenges that some of the implications of Windrush, in the context of, say, universal credit, which requires checks on, say, migration and the eligibility of people from overseas to claim benefits, and the importance of DWP to get that right as well. So, I mean, there are some. On that level, there are some concerns, but regardless of who the Secretary of State is. But I've been sort of impressed with Amber Rudd's willingness to listen. She's taken this step to scale back managed migration. I think it's sensible from a pragmatic perspective, but also to not rush in and try and fix universal credit with the first idea that she may have. You need to think about how the benefit system fits together in its entirety and make sensible reforms that work for everyone.
Deven Ghelani, thank you.
Thank you.